The worn military ID card hit the marble counter with a sharp crack. "This is fake," the bank manager sneered, sliding the card back toward the elderly man. "These discount veteran cards from online stores won't work here, sir." Harold Mitchell's weathered hands trembled slightly as he picked up his identification. At 73, he stood barely 5'6", his gray hair thinning, his flannel shirt hanging loose on his shrinking frame. The American flag pin on his collar seemed to mock him now. "Ma'am, I served 22 years. Sir, please don't waste my time." The manager's voice carried across the crowded bank lobby. "This veteran discount scam has been going around. We've seen dozens of fake IDs like this one." Every head in the bank turned. Whispers rippled through the line of waiting customers. Harold felt the familiar burn of shame creeping up his neck, the same feeling he'd carried for 50 years since Vietnam. A teenage employee behind the counter whispered to her coworker, "My grandfather says half these old guys never even served." The words cut through Harold like shrapnel, but what the manager didn't know was that General Marcus Williams had just walked through the glass doors. 30 minutes earlier, Harold had woken up in his small apartment to another disconnection notice. The electric company had given him until 5 o'clock today. His monthly pension check, $847 after taxes, was his only lifeline. He'd driven his rusty Honda Civic to First National Bank with one simple goal: cash his monthly pension check and pay his utilities before they shut off his power. Again. The car's air conditioning had died 3 summers ago, and the October heat made his Vietnam-damaged lungs struggle for breath. The routine had become harder each month. His arthritis made gripping the steering wheel painful. His vision, damaged by Agent Orange exposure decades ago, forced him to squint at road signs. The diabetes medications ate up most of his grocery money, but he persevered, just like he had in the jungles of Southeast Asia. Harold's apartment was a shrine to memories he tried to forget. Purple Heart citations he never displayed. Letters from fellow soldiers' families thanking him for bringing their boys home. A photograph of 12 young men in fatigues. He was the only one still alive. Every month, the same routine. Drive to the bank, cash the check, pay what he could, hope for the best. Harold approached the counter with the patience of a man who had learned to wait. He'd waited in trenches, waited for helicopters, waited for letters from home that never came. He'd waited 40 years for the nightmares to stop. They never did. "I'd like to cash this, please," he said quietly, sliding his pension check across the marble surface. The young teller, barely 20 with perfectly manicured nails, glanced at the check. Her nose wrinkled slightly at Harold's appearance. The worn flannel shirt, the scuffed shoes, the faint smell of the arthritis cream he couldn't afford to use sparingly. "I'll need to see your ID, sir." Harold fumbled for his wallet, his fingers stiff from decades-old shrapnel wounds. He pulled out his military identification card, the one that had gotten him through airport security, medical appointments, and grocery store discounts for years. The plastic was worn smooth from handling, the edges frayed. The teller held it up to the light, squinting. I need to get my manager." Harold's stomach dropped. He'd been through this before at other places. The suspicion, the assumption that he was trying to scam his way into discounts he didn't deserve. That's when everything went wrong. Manager Susan Patterson had been having the worst month of her career. Corporate was breathing down her neck about fraudulent transactions, and she'd already caught 3 people trying to use fake veteran IDs for loan applications. Her performance review was next week, and she needed to show she was tough on fraud. She saw Harold and immediately categorized him. Elderly, shabby clothes, probably desperate for money. The worn military ID looked suspicious, too old, too faded. The photo showed a young soldier with bright eyes and a confident smile. The man standing before her bore little resemblance to that image. "This is fake," she declared, her voice intentionally loud enough for others to hear. Public shame was often the best deterrent. "These online stores are selling fake military IDs to anyone with $20. Harold's face went pale. "Ma'am, I earned this in Vietnam. I was with the 101st Airborne." "Right," Patterson rolled her eyes. "And I suppose you're going to tell me you're some kind of war hero. Do you know how many people come in here every week with this same story?" She held up the ID card, displaying it to the growing crowd of onlookers. "Look at this thing. The edges are all worn down, Real military IDs don't look like this after a few years. Ma'am, this card is over 50 years old. Exactly my point. Military doesn't issue IDs that old. This is clearly a fake. A businessman in an expensive suit chuckled from the waiting area. These stolen valor guys are everywhere now. It's disgusting. Should call the police, muttered a woman with a designer purse. It's insulting to real veterans. My son is deployed in Afghanistan right now. Another customer, a middle-aged man in a golf shirt, shook his head. This is why I don't trust homeless people, always trying to scam the system. Harold felt the walls closing in. The fluorescent lights seemed too bright, the whispers too loud. This was his nightmare. Public humiliation, accusations of dishonor, the questioning of the one thing he'd done right in his complicated life. His hands began to shake more violently. The PTSD symptoms he'd managed to control for months were flooding back. Sweat beaded on his forehead, despite the air conditioning. Please, he whispered, I just need to cash my pension check. I have bills. Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave, Patterson announced. If you continue to present fraudulent documents, I'll have to call security. But what none of them noticed was the tall man in a crisp business suit who had just entered the bank. General Marcus Williams, recently retired from the Pentagon, was visiting his hometown bank to finalize his father's estate. He heard every word. General Williams had commanded over 50,000 troops in Iraq and Afghanistan. She'd briefed presidents, negotiated with foreign ministers, and made decisions that affected global security. But nothing, absolutely nothing, made her angrier than watching a veteran be humiliated. She approached the counter with the measured stride of someone accustomed to command. Excuse me, her voice cut through the crowd noise like a blade. Is there a problem here? Manager Patterson turned, annoyed by the interruption. Ma'am, this is a private matter. Harold Mitchell? General Williams stepped closer, ignoring the manager entirely. Sergeant Harold Mitchell, 101st Airborne Division? Harold's head snapped up. Through his failing eyesight, he struggled to focus on the woman's face. Something about her bearing, her presence, seemed familiar. Yes, ma'am, he whispered. Oh my God, Williams breathed. Harry, it's me, Patricia Williams. You saved my father's life in 1972. The bank fell silent. Harold's eyes widened as recognition dawned. Little Patty? Colonel Williams' daughter? General Williams now, she smiled, her voice warm, but her eyes still blazing as she glanced at the manager. And you're looking at one of the finest soldiers who ever served our country. Manager Patterson's face had gone from confident to confused to deeply worried in the span of 30 seconds. I'm sorry, I don't understand, she began. Then let me explain, General Williams said, her voice carrying the authority that had once commanded armies. She turned to address the entire bank lobby. This man, Williams pointed to Harold with the same gesture he'd once used to brief Joint Chiefs, pulled my father, Colonel James Williams, out of a burning helicopter in Vietnam on March 15, 1972. While under enemy fire, Sergeant Mitchell crawled back into that wreckage 3 times to save wounded soldiers. He spent 14 months in a military hospital recovering from burns and shrapnel wounds that nearly killed him. The silence in the bank was so complete you could hear the air conditioning humming. Williams continued, his voice growing stronger. He received the Silver Star, 2 Purple Hearts, and the Distinguished Service Cross. His service record is so classified that most of it won't be declassified for another 20 years. The mission he was on that day, the one where he saved my father, officially never happened. The businessman who had chuckled earlier now stood frozen, his face red with embarrassment. The woman with the designer purse had gone pale. But that's not the remarkable part, Williams said, his eyes scanning the crowd. The remarkable part is that after he spent over a year recovering from his injuries, after he'd already given everything for his country, Harold Mitchell re-enlisted. He served another tour in Vietnam because his unit needed him. Harold's legs felt weak. He gripped the counter for support, overwhelmed by hearing his story told by someone else, by having his service acknowledged after decades of silence. Ma'am, Manager Patterson stammered, her confidence completely shattered. I had no way of knowing. You had every way of knowing, Williams cut her off, his voice sharp enough to cut steel. It's called treating people with basic human dignity. It's called not assuming the worst about a man who risked everything for his country. It's called respecting your elders and honoring those who served. He gestured to Harold, whose hands were now shaking, not from fear but from overwhelming emotion. This man has more honor in his little finger than this entire room combined. He's struggled for 50 years with injuries sustained in service to this nation, with nightmares from things he saw and did so that you could sleep safely in your beds. The teenage employee who had whispered about fake veterans was now crying quietly behind the counter. Williams turned back to Harold, his expression softening dramatically. Harry, I've been looking for you for years. My father talked about you until the day he died. He said you were the bravest man he ever served with and the best soldier he ever knew. Tears ran down Harold's weathered cheeks. Your father was a good man, Marcus. A damn good officer. He saved more lives than I ever did. He'd be proud to see you today, Williams said firmly, then turned to the silent crowd. You should all be ashamed. This man bled for your freedom, and you stood by while someone insulted his service and questioned his honor. The silence was deafening. Some customers began to quietly leave, unable to meet Harold's eyes. General Marcus Williams pulled out his phone and made a call that would change everything. This is General Marcus Williams. He spoke into the device, his voice calm, but carrying the weight of absolute authority. I need you to connect me with the regional manager of First National Bank. Yes, I'll hold. Manager Patterson's face went white. She recognized the tone of someone who was used to having their calls returned immediately. Sir, there's no need to. There's every need, Williams replied, his steel gray eyes never leaving her face. Harold, what were you trying to do here today? Just cash my pension check, sir. Need to pay my electric bill before they shut it off tonight. Williams' jaw tightened visibly, a decorated war hero struggling to keep his lights on while bank employees humiliated him for trying to access his own money. The phone was answered quickly. Williams' reputation preceded him even in civilian circles. Yes, this is General Marcus Williams, recently retired from the Pentagon. He spoke into the phone, his voice carrying clearly across the silent bank. I'm standing in your downtown branch where one of your managers just accused a Silver Star recipient of fraud and threatened to call the police on him. Yes, I said Silver Star. No, I'm not exaggerating. I'm looking at his military ID right now. He held up Harold's worn identification card. The manager publicly humiliated a 73-year-old veteran who was simply trying to cash his pension check. Yes, his pension check from the Department of Veterans Affairs. The conversation continued for several tense minutes. Williams' responses were clipped and professional, but his meaning was unmistakable. I understand you'll want to review this personally. Yes, I'll wait for your call. 30 minutes? Fine. But understand this, if this isn't resolved to my satisfaction, my next call will be to the Secretary of Veterans Affairs. We served together in Baghdad. He handed the phone to Manager Patterson. He wants to speak with you. As Patterson took the call, her face cycled through several shades of pale. The conversation was brief and entirely one-sided, with Patterson mostly saying, yes, sir, and I understand, sir. I understand, sir. Yes, sir. Immediately, sir. Of course, sir. She hung up and turned to Harold with trembling hands. Mr. Mitchell, I sincerely apologize. We'll cash your check immediately, and the bank would like to offer you our premium Veterans Services package at no charge. Forever. That's a start, General Williams said coldly, his tone suggesting it was nowhere near enough. But he wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. Within 90 minutes, the bank's lobby had transformed into something resembling a military reunion. General Williams had made more calls, first to the local American Legion post, then to the Veterans of Foreign Wars chapter, then to the Retired Officers Association. Word spread quickly through the veteran community. One of their own needed support, and a general was personally involved. They came in trucks and motorcycles, in uniforms and civilian clothes. Old men with Vietnam patches, middle-aged women who'd served in Iraq, young veterans from Afghanistan. They filled the bank lobby with quiet dignity and unwavering solidarity. But they weren't just coming to show support. Many of them had stories. Harold Mitchell? Asked a grizzled man with a Marine's tattoo covering his forearm. You the Harold Mitchell who carried Jimmy Rodriguez to the medevac chopper in '73? Harold looked up in surprise. Jimmy Rodriguez. Yeah, I remember Jimmy. Kid from Texas? That's my uncle, the man said, tears in his eyes. He told me about you every Christmas until he died. Said you saved his life twice. Once in the jungle, and again by teaching him to never give up. A woman in her 50s approached next. Mr. Mitchell, I'm Carol Henderson. My father was Michael Henderson, 1st Infantry Division. Harold's face went pale. Mickey Henderson. He didn't make it home. No, he didn't. But before he died, he wrote to my mother about you, about how you held his hand in the field hospital, about how you promised him his little girl would grow up proud of her daddy. She handed Harold a worn letter. He asked my mother to find you someday, to tell you that promise meant everything to him. Harold sat in a chair that someone had brought him, overwhelmed by the attention and the memories flooding back. He'd spent 50 years trying to forget Vietnam, trying to blend into the background, trying not to think about the friends he'd lost and the things he'd seen. Now those memories were coming back not as nightmares, but as connections to families who had never forgotten. Harry, General Williams knelt beside his chair. I want you to know something. My father never forgot what you did. Before he died, he set up a scholarship fund for children of Vietnam veterans. We've been looking for you for over a decade because we want you on the board of trustees. Harold shook his head weakly. Sir, I'm not qualified for something like that. I never even finished high school. Dropped out to work in my daddy's garage. Then got drafted. You're qualified by your service. You're qualified by your sacrifice. You're qualified by your heart. And Harry, you're qualified by the fact that 23 families in this country owe their existence to your actions in Vietnam. Williams gestured to the growing crowd of veterans and their families. 23 men you saved or helped save. They came home, got married, had children. Those children had children. You're looking at a legacy of over 200 people who exist because of what you did in that jungle 50 years ago. Williams handed him an envelope. This is a letter my father wrote to you in 1975. He never had your address, so he kept it all these years. My mother gave it to me when he passed, along with instructions to find you. With shaking hands, Harold opened the letter. The handwriting was careful, precise, an officer's penmanship. Dear Harry, I know you probably won't read this because you're too modest to seek the recognition you deserve. But I need you to know that you saved more than my life that day. You saved my ability to come home to my son, to watch him grow up, to teach him how to throw a baseball and drive a car and be a man of honor. Every moment of joy in my life since 1972 exists because of you. You didn't just save a soldier, you saved a father, a husband, a future. My son Marcus is applying to West Point next year. He wants to serve because of the stories I've told him about heroes like you. You are a hero whether you believe it or not. With deepest respect and eternal gratitude, Colonel James Williams. The bank lobby had gone completely quiet. Even the businessman who had mocked Harold was now standing respectfully, his head bowed, looking ashamed of his earlier behavior. Manager Patterson approached hesitantly, her professional demeanor completely shattered. Mr. Mitchell, I need to apologize. Not just as a bank employee, but as a human being. I was wrong, completely, utterly wrong. Harold looked up at her, his eyes still wet with tears. Ma'am, I forgive you. We all make mistakes. I've made plenty in my life. No, she shook her head firmly. This wasn't a mistake. This was prejudice. This was me making assumptions about someone based on their appearance, their age, their circumstances. This was me forgetting that everyone who walks through that door has a story, has dignity, has worth. She turned to address the crowd of veterans who had filled her bank. I want you all to know that First National Bank is implementing new training for all employees about recognizing and honoring veteran status. And Mr. Mitchell, sir, you'll never pay another fee at this bank as long as you live. Your account will have premium status and will personally ensure you never face this kind of treatment again. One of the younger veterans, a woman with a prosthetic leg and multiple service ribbons on her jacket, stepped forward. Mr. Mitchell, I'm Sarah Chen, Staff Sergeant, Army Rangers. I lost my leg in Afghanistan in 2018. I want you to know that every deployment I served, every mission I completed, I was building on the foundation that veterans like you laid down. An older man with a Marine's tattoo and silver hair nodded gravely. Harold, I'm Tom Rodriguez. I served 3 tours in Desert Storm in Iraq. Everything we accomplished over there, we accomplished because we learned from Vietnam veterans like you, from your courage, from your sacrifice, from your hard-earned lessons about what it means to serve. A young man in his 30s wearing a Navy uniform spoke up. Sir, I'm Petty Officer David Kim. My grandfather served in Korea, my father in the Gulf War, and I just got back from a deployment in the South China Sea. We're all part of the same chain, sir. Your service made ours possible. One by one, veterans approached Harold. Each had a story, a connection, a moment of gratitude. The bank had become a place of healing, of our recognition, of community. Your lessons. One by one, veterans approached Harold. Each had a story, a connection, a moment of gratitude. The bank had become a place of healing, of recognition, of community. As the crowd began to thin, General Williams sat down next to Harold. Harry, I have a proposition for you. He looked at her warily. Ma'am, my father's house is empty. It's a good house in a good neighborhood, and it's paid for. I'd like you to live there. Harold shook his head immediately. I can't accept charity, ma'am. It's not charity. It's an honor. That house should be lived in by someone my father would respect, someone he would welcome as family. She pulled out another envelope. These are the utility bills for the past 3 months, all paid. There's also a small stipend from the scholarship fund, payment for your services as a board member. Harold stared at the envelope, afraid to touch it. Ma'am, I don't understand why you're doing this. General Williams was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was soft but firm. Because 53 years ago, you crawled into a burning helicopter to save my father. You didn't know him well. You didn't owe him anything. But you risked your life because it was the right thing to do. She gestured around the bank, where a few veterans still lingered, talking quietly among themselves. Today, I'm crawling into your burning helicopter because it's the right thing to do. Harold's shoulders began to shake. 50 years of carrying shame, of feeling forgotten, of believing he didn't matter. It all came pouring out in quiet sobs. I thought I was forgotten, he whispered. You were never forgotten, Harry, never. 6 months later, Harold Mitchell stood at the podium of the annual Veterans Day ceremony in downtown Springfield. His new suit fit him properly, the first one he'd owned in 20 years. His hair was neatly trimmed, his shoulders straighter, his eyes brighter. The crowd of 300 included the mayor, the entire city council, and dozens of local business leaders. But Harold's attention was focused on the front row, where General Patricia Williams sat next to manager Susan Patterson, who had become an unexpected ally in supporting local veterans. 50 years ago, Harold began, his voice stronger than it had been in decades. I came home from a war that nobody wanted to talk about. I spent half a century believing that my service didn't matter, that I was forgotten, that the sacrifices my brothers and I made were meaningless. He paused, looking out over the sea of faces. 6 months ago, I learned something important. Heroes aren't forgotten. Sometimes they're just waiting to be recognized. He gestured to the crowd of veterans seated in the front rows, men and women from every conflict since Vietnam, united by service and sacrifice. But here's what I really learned. Being a hero isn't about the medals on your chest or the stories people tell about you. Being a hero is about showing up for each other, especially when it's hard, especially when no one else will. His eyes found General Williams. Sometimes heroes wear uniforms. Sometimes they wear business oints. Sometimes they just wear the courage to stand up when someone needs defending. The applause was thunderous. After the ceremony, as Harold shook hands with well-wishers and accepted thanks from fellow veterans, a young reporter approached him. Mr. Mitchell, what would you say to people who might find themselves in a similar situation, veterans who feel forgotten or dismissed? Harold thought for a moment, his weathered hands steady now, his voice clear. I'd say this, your service matters, your sacrifice matters, you matter. And if the world forgets that for a while, don't give up. There are people out there who remember, who care, who will stand up for you when you need it most. He looked around at the crowd of veterans, families, and community members who had stayed to continue the conversation. We're not just individuals. We're part of something bigger. We're part of a family that doesn't leave anyone behind. As the sun set over Springfield, Harold Mitchell walked to his car, not the rusty Honda Civic he'd driven for years, but a reliable sedan that Gentera Williams had helped him purchase through the Veterans Fund. He wasn't the same man who had walked into First National Bank 6 months ago. The shame was gone, replaced by dignity. The isolation was gone, replaced by community. The doubt was gone, replaced by purpose. But most importantly, Harold Mitchell was no longer invisible. He was home. 6 months after the incident at First National Bank, the story had spread far beyond Springfield. The bank's new Veterans Services program became a model for financial institutions nationwide. Manager Susan Patterson had become one of the state's leading advocates for veteran affairs, using her experience as a teaching moment about the importance of dignity and respect. General Patricia Williams established the Harold Mitchell Foundation, providing housing and support services for aging veterans. The foundation's motto, engraved on a plaque in Harold's honor, read simply, "No hero left behind." And Harold Mitchell, who had spent 50 years believing he was forgotten, learned that some stories don't end, they just begin new chapters. Today, if you walk into any First National Bank branch, you'll see a photograph near the entrance. An elderly man in a flannel shirt standing next to a woman in military dress uniform, both smiling. The caption reads, "Heroes come in all forms. We're honored to serve those who served." Harold Mitchell was 73 years old when his story began. He was 74 when he realized it would never end, because heroes, real heroes, are never truly forgotten. Sometimes they just need someone brave enough to remember the end. If you believe in honoring our veterans and treating everyone with dignity and respect, share this story. Comment honor below if you think Harold Mitchell deserves recognition. Subscribe for more stories about ordinary people doing extraordinary things.